They didn't flinch when you cried. They didn't chase when you walked away. And they sure as hell didn't show regret when you begged them to care. But listen to me carefully. Avoidants don't regret losing you until you become someone they can never reach again. Because regret doesn't come when you're available. Regret comes when you're untouchable. They don't regret you the moment you walk away. They don't feel the weight of what they've lost when you're still emotionally attached, when you're still wondering if they're thinking about you, still replaying every conversation, every mistake, and every moment of closeness that now feels like a lie. You think they'll miss you because you were good to them. You think they'll feel your absence just because you're gone, but that's not how it works with someone who runs from closeness. Avoidants don't feel the sting of loss in the same rhythm as you. Their regret isn't immediate. It's not sparked by your tears. It's not activated by your pain. It's triggered by something far more powerful, your transformation. When you're still stuck in the loop of longing, they can feel it. Even if you're not reaching out, even if you're keeping your distance, emotionally you're still tethered to them. And they can sense that. There's a strange, energetic safety for the avoidant when they know they still matter to you, when they know they could come back, even if they're not planning to. Your emotional availability, even at a distance, still gives them power. And as long as you're stuck hoping, waiting, or proving, they don't feel the need to question their decision. Because from where they stand, they haven't really lost you. Not yet. But everything shifts the moment you stop. The moment you stop needing them to understand, the moment you stop blaming yourself, the moment you stop rehearsing conversations in your head and start rebuilding your self-worth, that's when the real loss begins. Because that's when you start pulling your energy back. You detach not out of revenge, but out of rebirth. You evolve. You become unavailable, not because you're playing games, but because your standards rise with your healing. Your vibe changes. Your silence becomes stronger than any words you ever spoke. And slowly, the avoidant starts to feel something they're not used to feeling: the absence of control. They begin to realize that the door they thought would always be slightly open is now sealed. They don't regret losing the version of you who waited. They regret losing the version of you who moved on. Because that version is no longer accessible, no longer seeking closure, no longer offering comfort. That's when regret creeps in, not as a wave, but as a slow burn, the kind that keeps them awake at night. Not because you begged them to care, but because you stopped trying. There comes a moment in every healing journey when you realize you're exhausted, not just tired, but drained from explaining yourself to someone who never truly tried to understand you. You've cried, pleaded, over-explained, and bent over backwards to justify why you feel what you feel. You've twisted yourself into emotional knots trying to make them see your heart. But avoidants don't respond to words the way you hope. They shut down when things get real. They withdraw when emotions surface. And the more you try to prove your love, the more they retreat into their shell. It's not that they didn't hear you. It's that they didn't want to feel what you were saying. But then something shifts, something powerful. You stop, not out of bitterness or resentment, but because your spirit has had enough. You realize that the more you explain yourself to someone who doesn't meet you halfway, the more you lose pieces of your own identity. And that's the moment the dynamic begins to change. Because avoidants are used to you filling in the silence. They're used to you doing the emotional labor. They're used to you fighting for the connection while they sit comfortably on the sidelines. When you go quiet, truly quiet, they start to notice. It's not the kind of silence that comes from manipulation or game playing. It's the silence that comes from self-respect. You no longer need them to get it. You no longer seek validation from the very person who invalidated your feelings time and time again. You stop trying to prove that you were worthy of their love. And when that shift happens, it disorients them. The certainty they once had about your place in their life starts to crumble. Avoidants don't respond to lectures, emotional essays, or heartfelt pleas, but they do respond to energy. And when that energy is gone, when the person who once fought for them becomes still, composed, and emotionally unavailable, it forces them to confront what they pushed away. Your lack of reaction becomes louder than any confrontation ever did. Your absence of effort becomes the message they can't unhear, because suddenly they're left alone with the space you used to fill, and that space feels different, colder, quieter, empty in a way they didn't expect. You didn't slam the door, you didn't explode, you simply stopped showing up where you weren't seen. And in that calm, in that detachment, they finally begin to feel the weight of your silence. Energy doesn't lie. You can tell yourself you've moved on, you can block their number, delete the photos, and avoid the places you used to go together. But if your energy is still fixated on them, they can feel it, and so can you. That's why healing isn't about pretending you're over it. It's about reclaiming the energy you poured into someone who couldn't hold it, who didn't cherish it, and who didn't know what to do with the depth you offered. At first, after the separation, you still carry them inside you. You replay conversations. You try to decode the mixed signals. You wonder if they ever truly cared. And all of that is normal. It's part of the process. But eventually, something inside you begins to awaken. You start realizing how much of yourself was lost in the process of trying to keep them close. How many of your dreams you put on hold. How many of your emotional needs you buried. And as that awareness grows, so does your hunger for something better, not just from others, but from yourself. That's when you begin pulling your energy back. You start spending time with people who actually nourish your spirit. You dive into your goals, your passions, your healing. You stop checking their social media, not because it hurts, but because it no longer interests you. You stop wondering what they think, because your mind is now occupied by you, your growth, your peace, your glow. The energy that once fueled the relationship is now being redirected toward your own evolution. And the more that happens, the more radiant you become. Your confidence returns, your posture shifts. You're no longer operating from lack, you're moving from wholeness. And here's the thing, they feel it. Avoidants may not show it. They may not say a word, but they notice. They notice when your energy is no longer circling around them. They notice when you stop orbiting their emotional detachment. They notice when your light gets brighter and they're no longer its focus. They feel the loss, not of your presence, but of your power. And that's what they miss most, because deep down, they knew you were their safe place, even if they couldn't admit it. Now, that safety is gone. That warmth is no longer available. You didn't just walk away, you elevated. And the higher you rise, the more they realize what they let go of. Not just a person, but an energy they can't replicate anywhere else. Avoidants crave connection just as much as anyone else. But what sets them apart is how deeply they fear the vulnerability that real connection requires. To the outside world, they seem composed, emotionally distant, sometimes even cold. But that distance is a mask. It's a shield to protect them from the fear of being engulfed, the fear of losing control, the fear of being emotionally exposed. So when they sense closeness, they retreat. When things get too real, too raw, too emotionally intimate, they create distance. They disconnect not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much and don't know how to regulate it. But what happens when the person they used to keep at arm's length suddenly stops reaching for them? When the one who used to send long texts, check in, show up, love unconditionally, suddenly disappears into emotional silence. That's when the avoidant starts to feel something they've been trying to avoid all along: rejection. Avoidants run from intimacy because they're afraid of being hurt. Ironically, in doing so, they often end up creating the exact pain they were trying to avoid. And here's where the shift becomes undeniable. When you stop showing up emotionally, when you become unavailable, not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of genuine growth, they begin to feel the discomfort they usually force you to carry. They begin to taste the consequences of their detachment. You see, when you were emotionally available, they could distance themselves while still feeling safe. You were always there, always open, always ready to repair the connection, no matter how badly they treated it. But when that dynamic flips, when you become the unavailable one, it throws them off balance. Suddenly, the emotional power dynamic is reversed. Now they're the one being left on read. Now they're the one sensing distance. Now they're the one wondering, what happened? They start replaying moments in their mind, trying to pinpoint when they lost access to you. And this access, they thought it would always be there, that you would always come back, that no matter how cold they acted, your warmth would return. But now your warmth is gone. You've built boundaries. You're not begging. You're not explaining. You're not emotionally chasing. You've become the exact thing they fear unreachable. And that, more than anything, forces them to feel the regret they never expected. Not because you made them feel it, but because your absence left them alone with their own unhealed patterns. Patterns they can no longer deny when the mirror you once held up is no longer there. When you were wrapped up in the relationship with an avoidant, you might have thought they were the best you could get. You convinced yourself to settle for breadcrumbs. You lowered your standards, ignored your intuition, and kept showing up for someone who rarely met you halfway. Why? Because you saw potential. Because deep down you believed that if you loved them hard enough, they would eventually feel safe enough to love you back in the same way. But now you see it differently. You realize you weren't asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. As you begin to heal, to reconnect with your self-worth, your entire energy shifts. You stop romanticizing emotional unavailability. You stop mistaking chaos for chemistry. And slowly, you start attracting a completely different type of person into your life. People who are secure, grounded, emotionally present. People who listen. People who value communication, consistency, and honesty. These people aren't confused about their feelings for you. They don't run when things get serious. They lean in. And this is where it begins to sting for the avoidant. Because now they see you with new eyes. They notice the way others treat you, the respect, the admiration, the ease. And suddenly they realize something they couldn't see before: you were never the problem. They start to understand that the connection didn't fail because you were too much. It failed because they weren't enough. Not emotionally, not mentally, not relationally. They feel the regret not just because you've moved on, but because who you've moved on to reflects everything they failed to be. They see someone else doing what they couldn't, loving you properly. And that mirror is brutal. It forces them to confront the reality that they had access to someone rare, someone nurturing, someone deep. And they fumbled it, not because you weren't worthy, but because they weren't ready. Your glow up, your healing, your alignment with people who match your emotional maturity, it all becomes a spotlight on what they let go. And here's the part that cuts the deepest. It's not just that you moved on, it's that you moved up. You leveled up in love, in self-worth, in boundaries. And in doing so, you proved something powerful. They were never the prize, you were. And now that you know it, they can't unsee it. In the beginning, your presence was a given. You were always there, texting first, checking in, making plans, offering emotional safety without them even asking for it. You filled the empty spaces with warmth. You created emotional connection even when they were disconnected. You were the steady heartbeat in the relationship. And because avoidants often take comfort for granted, they didn't notice the weight you were carrying. They didn't appreciate the emotional work you were doing to hold everything together. To them, it was just how you are, as if your loyalty, your care, your consistency were endless supplies they could dip into without consequence. But what happens when you stop being available? What happens when the calls stop, the texts stop, the emotional caretaking ends? What happens when you pull your energy out of that space and redirect it toward yourself? At first, they don't notice. Avoidants are wired to distract themselves, to disconnect from their emotions and repress the parts of life that feel too overwhelming. So they keep moving. They go on with their routines, act like nothing happened, and convince themselves that you'll be back eventually, or that they never needed you to begin with. But avoidance only works when there's something to avoid. And your silence, your absence, your complete energetic withdrawal creates a vacuum they can't ignore forever. One day they wake up and realize that the air feels different. The comfort they once relied on is gone. The emotional security they never acknowledged has vanished. And now they're left with the silence, the kind that echoes, the kind that makes them uncomfortable in their own company. Because for the first time, there's no emotional distraction, no soothing presence, no one there to remind them they matter. And that's when they feel it. Regret doesn't hit them like a lightning bolt. It creeps in like fog. It shows up in moments of stillness, late at night, during long drives, when they scroll through their phone and see no messages from you, when they reach for something emotionally familiar and it's just not there. Your absence becomes a mirror reflecting their emptiness. They may not show it, they may not reach out, But inside, the recognition is growing you mattered more than they ever allowed themselves to admit. Because in losing you, they didn't just lose a relationship, they lost the emotional anchor they never knew they depended on. And now, the silence you've left behind speaks louder than anything you ever said. The version of you that stayed, that waited, that hoped, they remember that version well. That was the version who forgave too easily, who believed in their potential more than their patterns, who made excuses for the emotional distance, the inconsistency, and the push-pull dynamic. That version of you accepted less because you believed love meant being patient with someone who was just afraid. And they got comfortable with that. They knew how to interact with that version of you. They knew how far they could pull away before you'd come chasing. It gave them a sense of control. It gave them the upper hand. But something happens when you start to heal, when the heartbreak forces you to go inward and look at the parts of yourself that allowed the cycle to continue. You begin to outgrow the very version of yourself they were attached to. And the more you grow, the more unrecognizable you become to them, not because you've changed who you are at your core, but because you've finally stopped betraying yourself to keep someone else comfortable. You've raised your standards. You've learned the power of boundaries. You've replaced self-sacrifice with self-respect. And that shift, it's not subtle. Your energy is different. You're no longer reactive. You're not chasing, explaining, overcompensating. You've stepped into your worth so deeply that their games no longer affect you. The same things they used to do to trigger you, to reel you back in, they don't land anymore. You see through the silence, the passive aggression, the emotional shutdowns. You've read the patterns, and now you're no longer interested in playing a role in them. And this evolution is what sparks their regret. Because now, when they think about reaching out, they don't know who they're reaching out to. That old version of you, the one who would have welcomed them back with open arms, is gone. Replaced by someone who is healed, whole, and discerning. Someone who doesn't just hand out access. Someone who has learned that love should never require self-abandonment. They regret not just losing you, but losing the chance to be loved by the most authentic version of you. Because that version is now reserved for someone who can meet you there. Someone who doesn't run. Someone who doesn't need to be chased. Someone who values the evolved you. And the avoidant knows deep down that they never evolved fast enough to keep up. There comes a point in your healing where you stop wanting revenge. You stop wanting them to feel the pain you felt. You stop needing closure or a long message explaining why they did what they did. You reach a level of inner peace that doesn't require answers anymore. And ironically, that is what hits them the hardest, because now you've forgiven, not for them, but for yourself. You've let go of the anger, the confusion, the stories you used to tell yourself at night just to make sense of their behavior. You no longer carry the emotional weight of the relationship on your back. You've dropped it, and you're walking lighter, stronger, freer. But here's the part that most avoidants never expect. You can forgive someone and still never give them access to you again. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconnection. It doesn't mean forgetting how they made you feel. It means releasing yourself from the emotional prison they left you in. You no longer replay the arguments. You no longer wonder what they're doing or if they've changed. You no longer fantasize about what could have been. You've outgrown the version of yourself who tolerated confusion disguised as space and inconsistency masked as complexity. You've reached a point where peace feels better than potential, where your boundaries are no longer negotiable, where your self-worth no longer depends on someone else seeing your value. And that unshakable peace, it radiates from you. You're not bitter. You're not cold. You're just done. And that energy, the energy of being truly done, is what shakes them to their core. Because now they can't guilt you into coming back. They can't trigger you with silence. They can't pull you in with half-hearted efforts. Everything they used to do to regain control, to keep you emotionally hooked, it doesn't work anymore. You've grown, you've matured, you've healed, and most importantly, you've moved on. And that's when the avoidant finally sees the full cost of what they lost. Not just a person, but a connection that was safe, loyal, loving, and real. And by the time they feel that regret, it's too late. You're no longer waiting. You're no longer hoping. You've forgiven, yes, but the door is closed. not out of spite, out of self-respect. And they finally understand the version of you they once knew doesn't live here anymore. When you stop chasing, stop explaining, stop trying to fix what someone else refuses to face, you don't just walk away from a relationship. You walk into yourself. The very thing that makes avoidance begin to feel regret is the same thing they were running from all along: your emotional strength. The moment you stop making yourself emotionally available to someone who feeds off your presence without ever feeding it back, you shift the dynamic entirely. You go from someone trying to be chosen to someone who chooses themselves. And that shift, that's where their regret begins to grow, slowly and painfully, like a shadow that follows them into every new interaction they have, because no one else will mirror the love and energy you once gave. Avoidants don't regret you because you cried. They don't regret you because you begged. They don't regret you when you're still orbiting their silence, hoping they'll wake up and realize what they had. Regret doesn't show up when you're still emotionally available. It shows up when you're emotionally gone. When you've evolved so far past the pain that they can no longer reach you, not through guilt, not through nostalgia, not even through apology. Your growth becomes the one thing they can't control. And for someone who needs emotional distance to feel safe, watching you become untouchable is the ultimate confrontation with their own limitations. What they don't realize until it's too late is that the version of you they pushed away will never return. Because you didn't just heal from them. You outgrew the version of yourself that accepted their love in fragments. And now they're stuck watching someone else become everything they were too afraid to embrace. They start to see you thriving, attracting, glowing, not in revenge, but in peace. You're not proving anything to them anymore. You're simply existing in your power. And that existence, without any reachability, any emotional dependency, any leftover longing, is what leaves the deepest mark. The truth is, avoidants don't regret the person. They regret the energy, the security, the safety, the way they felt seen without judgment, held without pressure. But that energy no longer belongs to them. It belongs to the future you're building with someone who doesn't run from love. Someone who doesn't need you to shrink so they can feel comfortable. Someone who matches the depth you were forced to suppress. And that realization, that they will never again be on the receiving end of what you once freely gave, that is what truly haunts them. So no, you don't need to go back. You don't need to explain yourself one last time. You don't need to stay emotionally available, hoping they'll come to their senses. Because the highest closure isn't a conversation, it's transformation. When they finally regret losing you, they'll regret it alone. Because by the time they realize what they had, you'll already be everything they were too afraid to hold, and far too evolved to ever return to who you were. Thank you for watching. If this message resonated with you, it means you're growing, evolving, and stepping into your power. Remember, you don't need validation from someone who couldn't value you. Keep choosing yourself every single day. If you found value here, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps this message reach those who need it most. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful reminder of your worth. Until next time, stay strong, stay grounded, and never settle for anything less than the love you deserve. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you in the next one.